All right, I'll call to order the study session, and first thing up is our public contracting rules phase 2 with Bonnie and Kelly.
Hello. So you guys will probably recall we did phase 1, a review of our public contracting rules last fall, and did some modifications which were adopted December 19th of 2017. So some of those modifications that we made in December, we're updating some of the rules to be compliant with statute, something we hadn't done in about 12 years. Those were areas like qualification-based selection for personal services. We made some modifications to the rules that were just for administrative ease, like increasing the small procurement from 5,000 to 10,000, something that the state had done 3 to 4 years prior to us doing it. And then we added some federal requirements section to our rules. So we just made some kind of basic updates, things that got us to be compliant in some areas that we weren't. At that time, the city attorney, Jordan Ramus, recommended that we consider all our options for going forward. And those options were basically continue to follow having our own procurement rules and opting out of the Attorney General model rules. But we could create a hybrid approach in which we adopted some model rules into our, that we could adopt some model rules into our procurement rules. And we did do that with the last update in December. We adopted a whole section that was very specific to model rules that was for reinstatement and retroactive approval of a contract. So if a contract expired, there are specific steps which could be taken if it qualified to be reinstated, or if we had a contract that was getting approved later by council, but it was retroactive to a specific date. We adopted things like that, and so at this time we have a hybrid approach. We have a blend of model rules and our own procurement rules that we've adopted that are based on state statute. So again, the recommendation from the city attorney was continue with that hybrid approach, or completely follow model rules. We could opt in to following model rules, but we don't know what that looks like. So what leads us to phase 2 here is how do we go about making that decision and that determination of what's going to suit the city best, what's going to suit staff best as far as procedures go. But I did want to focus a little bit. We have made some improvements since and some internal changes in our procedures since we adopted the rules and the revised rules in December. We've held a few trainings. I've also implemented trainings for new staff that comes on board that's going to be pretty robust in handling contracts or involved with contracts, like our engineering staff, and making sure that we're sitting down with them and going over the city's procedures. We've released a few documents, internal procedure documents that's a little more detailed in how our rules are and with the new modifications. And then we're currently working on some internal risk management pieces, specifically to insurance limits, and kind of trying to find ways to identify more on a case-by-case or a contract-by-contract basis and fit those insurance needs to that contract, and not just having our standard template. Everybody has 2-3 million requirements. We need to really kind of analyze each contract on its own scope and it's on its own basis, and analyze that risk. So Bonnie and I are working on some documents for that and internal procedures for that, which we hope to get out in the next couple months.
So basically, Kelly's been awesome in trying to make sure that the current process that we have in place is following our rules, but also training and just really emphasizing the importance of contracting rules in general with employees. She's definitely made a lot of progress in the last several months towards that.
So leading us to phase 2, and taking that recommendation into account, what I envision for phase 2 is really a rule-by-rule analysis. So comparing our current city rule with what it's derived from statute and comparing that to a model rule. What do they look like side by side? Because even if they're compliant, as they are now, we might be able to enhance it better. We might be able to modify it to better fit the city's needs. Or maybe the model rule is the better option to go, and we can modify that way. But it's really, we have a lot of rules, as you know, but it's going section by section, going through the personal services, going through public improvement, going through small procurement, the intermediate procedures, and really lining them up side by side so we can see what's going to suit us best. My idea is to go section by section. I anticipate this whole project taking about a year. But going section by section, and at the end of each section, creating a meeting with key stakeholders, staff that's highly involved in those types of contracts. Certain departments use certain contract types more than others. So involving those end users that are going to have the feedback and help make a recommendation of what we should go with. And that's kind of what I envision for it. With that, we also need to create a program that's minority-owned, women-owned, the local businesses, the disabled veterans. We need a program that gives preference to those businesses. And we don't really have that right now, and we need to put one in place, but it's got to be very specific. We've got to have the procedures in place. We've got to have the requirements, the certification, those checks, so that when we put that in a solicitation, we make sure that we're doing it correctly, and we make sure that we can get that across the board on all our solicitations. So that's kind of its own section within this, is the minority-owned and women-owned and local businesses. But creating that program kind of goes in line with it. We need to kind of get that adopted into our rules.
So the state model rules don't have a program like that?
They may.
No.
I've honestly just started kind of looking at it. I've been polling. I know, Shane, you provided metros last time, so we have that as a reference. I pulled the city of Beaverton's. So we have some, and I'll look at if the model rules do as well, but just kind of looking at them, not saying that, oh, they did theirs, we should just take what they've done. We need to make sure it works for us.
Do you know, do you network with your counterparts in other cities? Do you know of cities that are just following the model rules and what their experience has been?
Well, so a lot of the conferences and stuff that I go to, trainings I go to, are put on by the state of Oregon and their procurement department. So the Department of Administrative Services has their own rules that they follow, which are the model rules. But then there's sub-departments, ODOT, they have their own set of rules, so it kind of varies. But yeah, there are agencies who follow the model rules.
And just to add, a lot of the smaller communities are the ones that have, it's a lot of work to sort of keep up on this information. It changes, it's easier, especially as federal regulations change and other pieces change, just to follow the states. But I do think with the sheer volume of contracting we're doing right now from the budget that we've adopted, it makes a lot of sense for us to make sure that we're hitting your expectations within that process. And that won't be model, is my guess.
And regardless of whether in the end we choose to go full model rules or we continue with a hybrid approach, it sets us up to, as changes are made with model rules and statute, we're now better aligned to make sure that we are updating our rules as well. But kind of going back, my vision, having those meetings with those key stakeholders, making a recommendation. And then we also need to enhance we added some federal requirements, but we need to enhance that. We need to add more step-by-step procedures for the grants and the other awards that we get and how we track that and do that. Last December, we just kind of added the basic stuff that we needed to get in, as was required by December 25th. So we need to enhance that section as well. So at this point, my questions go to you. At what stages would you guys like to be involved? At what points and how often would you like progress reports on this? Again, I anticipate this project going through July of next year. So.
I have a question and then
Sure.
a response to your question. When you say key stakeholders, other than city staff, who are some of the key stakeholders? Who would that be?
Well, the city attorney would be involved, obviously, throughout. The idea when this project and this phase was first kind of starting to develop, it was the idea that we would have an in-house city attorney, and that person would be used. We didn't budget for anything else. But there are going to be points where it's beyond my knowledge, and I'm going to need to verify that information. So whether that's with Jordan Ramus or in-house.
But you don't, so you don't, you're not saying that we would invite big developers or medium-sized
No, I wouldn't be
developers?
inviting contractors, consultants to be a part of this. I mean, key stakeholders to me is you guys council, it is staff that either wants to be involved or is highly useful of those contract types.
Okay. And then in response to your question, looking at the timelines here, if you came back quarterly, would there be any kind of update that you could give other than saying I've made 25% progress in these lines, sort of thing?
Good question.
I mean,
Good question.
if you're doing chunks at a time,
Yeah,
then that's
I mean,
one thing. But if it's just
most likely, if I did it quarterly, what I'd be coming back with is just giving you the basis of what sections have been reviewed, maybe kind of an analysis of what the recommendations are leaning towards.
What are the decision points, Kelly? What do you think are the points when we're actually going to be needing to adopt sections or chunks of the code?
I think a couple things for me come to mind. I think there's probably a lot of model rules out there that I'm not aware of in detail, that we maybe haven't considered before, that could be beneficial to us. So as I go throughout this process, there's going to be, we don't have a rule for it, but there's a model rule for it. Kind of like with the reinstatement of an expired contract and the retroactive approval. That was something we potentially could benefit from, and so we adopted it in. So that'll be a decision point. But it's really gonna, I mean, if the trend is, no, we like our own rule, we like our rule, but maybe we can modify it this way, it's gonna start to trend towards keeping our own contracting rules with maybe some modifications versus going full model rules, because it has to be one or the other.
So what oh, sorry, go for it.
Can we adopt halfway? Right? I mean, can we adopt the contracting rules at one point, and these are the most updated, and then here's the next phase, and we can update those?
Yeah, we could. I mean, if we found that there was some stuff that was maybe not compliant, it might be a good idea to bring us into compliance at that point in time, maybe halfway through or something, and then continue forward.
But your initial plan was just one package at the
Was
end?
at the end,
Okay.
full analysis, let's see what we came up with.
So I'm going to make a recommendation,
Sure.
actually, that we hold and do it all at once. I think that explaining to staff in different iterations means that we'll have certain things that are in place that have changed while
Yeah.
others have stayed the same. It's going to add to
Right.
some confusion.
Right.
I'd like to recommend that we do maybe just a memo update to all of you that says this is what we've gotten to today, as long as there's not a decision-making process on a quarterly basis. And then if there's a policy recommendation that is unique, different from what we've done in the past, that we come back to you and say, hey, this isn't direction you've given us, but we think that this is a really great idea out of X community. Would you be supportive of including it? We'll bring those items to you on a one-off basis. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
And you'd like those quarterly, or those memos
Just whenever,
quarterly?
whenever you
If
find
there's
those.
something.
when you find a good breaking point that you
Yeah.
can update's necessary.
Yeah,
And
you
Kelly,
find
I'll
a
send
place
you
where
the
you
update
can
for
go
those.
down one of two roads.
What's that?
I'll send you the form for those,
Okay,
and then we'll just include them in the packet so that they're publicly informed, so that the public knows what's happening.
Okay.
But it won't require time on an agenda unless we have a significant change.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Okay, sounds good.
And the only other, I think, League of Cities is going after that proposal that I think it was Hillsborough floated last session, on the contracting rules around engineers, architects,
Oh, yeah.
surveyors.
And,
So
yeah,
that could,
And if that happens, we will
we
jump on
should
it
absolutely.
overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of change where it would drastically impact our ability to negotiate, we'll get on quickly. We won't use this process to do that.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, if that passes, I would absolutely recommend adopting that in as soon as we can.
And Kelly, in addition to the metro rules,
Yeah.
I believe I also shared, and if I didn't, it's online, the League of Oregon Cities just published a contracting manual, public contracting
Okay.
manual, best practices
Okay.
guidelines, and it's pretty extensive.
Great.
That may be helpful to you.
Yeah, Yeah, I know the state of Oregon did something similar as well. So yeah, I have a lot of reference points for sure, but I'll look into that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Good. Thank you. All right, next up we have the Comprehensive Plan Housing Work Update with David Levitan. And Denny. Apparently.
I might as well join.
And Mary maybe.
I'll probably say something.
Come on up.
All right.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilors. David Levitan, Senior Planner, here with Planning Director Denny Egner. So we're here tonight just to have a very kind of informal conversation. We're moving into the second block of work for the comprehensive plan, which is going to include, among 5 topics, housing. It's obviously a topic very near and dear to the heart of the City Council. There's been a lot of work done recently between the housing affordability strategy that was just adopted on July 17th. We have a lot of ongoing projects. We're working on a cottage cluster feasibility analysis. We're discussing with the LCD some funding that we may be receiving to be looking at accessory dwelling units and how to make those easier to develop. And so as we move into this second block of work, we wanted to engage council very early in the process just to get their thoughts. From a Goal 10, kind of statewide planning Goal 10 perspective, as far as kind of looking at our housing needs and our housing supply, we're in a very good place. So this comprehensive plan update as it relates to housing is really about what the community's priorities are, and that includes the council's priorities. And so, you know, we have plenty of supply to meet our projected 20-year housing demand. So it's really about how do we kind of incorporate and implement some of the things that came out during the community visioning. The vision talks about things like having affordable housing and missing middle housing kind of spread throughout the city. That's something that the zoning doesn't currently really allow, and especially the eastern half of the city is pretty much dominated by the R7 zone. So that's one thing that we would like to get some input on. And then just really other topics related to housing that as we start to engage the CPAC, our first meeting is on September 10th. We're also going to be incorporating a technical advisory group made up of department heads and staff from other agencies as well on the housing side. That'll include Community Development Director Alma Flores, as well as our new Housing and Economic Development Coordinator Valeria Vidal. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to meet her. But yeah, we just wanted to have a very high-level conversation about some of the topics and some of the issues that you'd really like us as we start to shape this block of work for housing to really bring up. So that's kind of the gist of the presentation. And we had kind of some general comments just as far as kind of getting to the heart of it. Just are there topics that you would like to make sure that we do address? And then just how would you like to be incorporated into the process? Obviously, Mayor Gamba and Council President Beatty are on the CPAC. I know that both Councilor Parks and Councilor Abema were on the Planning Commission, so they had a lot of experience with housing. And I know that Councilor Falconer has been, you know, very interested and passionate about housing issues. We appreciate a lot of the information that she's been passing on to us, so we just wanted to start that conversation. Danny, did you have anything?
No, not really, except that this was an opportunity to talk with you before Alma's calling me. I can hear that going off in my ears.
Ask them this.
It's an opportunity to talk with you before we really get started with the committee, and it's a little different model than we used the first round on the block 1. So, you know, we can go wherever you're interested in kind of going with this. And this gives you an opportunity to start us off in a particular direction. We're going to also talk with the Planning Commission tonight, have a similar kind of very open-ended conversation. So,
well, my comment, maybe the first one, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I would maybe just want to gauge the rest of council. I would like more opportunity on this one because it is our #1 goal. So that's my feeling, that, you know, the last one we were given a packet, you know, twice and asked to just sort of, you know, move it along by resolution, you know, that, what were we calling it? The pinning down of that block. And I think that this one is so much, I mean, the current, you know, in the current comprehensive plan, it's really prescriptive and in a way that really is tied so tightly to our current zoning, that I think that in my mind, you know, in order to achieve the vision, we are going to completely be dismantling both of these two at the same time. And so I think that we really should be providing a lot more input on the information that we're getting from the community and the task force, the committee. So that's my opinion on maybe sort of the second question first, is that we should be more involved on this one. And I would hope Planning Commission would want to be more involved on this one as well.
I guess I almost feel like this one, especially having watched what's going on in Portland with theirs, should be its own, you know, should almost be its own and not be lumped in there with the other things for the, its own block.
I agree with that.
So one of the issues, just so you know on that front, is that I have held Denny extremely tight to a deadline.
Yeah.
So he has until November of 2019.
I think it's December of 20.
I think it's November of 2019 to deliver this package to you guys for adoption, in part because it was commitments we made to the community for timelines around the visioning. So I wanted to make sure we were hitting those deadlines. If we were to add a separated block, my guess is it would add time to that outcome. And so it's a question to you of, we've really been trying to hit that date because of those commitments. If you feel like you want to shift it, we can talk about that, but it will shift the deadline by at least 2 months.
What else, remind me, what else is in this particular block? Natural.
So we have, so we have Willamette Greenway, Parks and Recreation, Climate Change and Energy, and then hazards.
Oh, yeah,
Just a couple little,
And also natural resource?
No.
Natural
that's
resources in the
third.
I thought
block.
that was.
Yeah, so it's hazards, which is sort of related.
Except I haven't quite written this memo to David yet, but since I don't have to write memos to David, but I identified another topic that we should throw into block 3, which is the town center plan, which is horribly outdated, and make it a chapter of the comp plan. So there's always things we can throw in.
Well, I mean, whether it's its own block or not, it seems to me we need a public meeting on this zoning stuff that's not done the way the last 4 block. We're going to discuss everything. I mean, I think there will be enough interest and enough agitation over the idea of changing zoning that it's probably going to need its own kind of public meeting.
As David noted, it's really up to you where we want to go with this too. So we're not driven by a need to meet any of the state goal requirements or any metro requirements. So it's kind of, what do we believe we need to make the community more affordable, and so we've got a lot of latitude in where we go. And I think the vision does describe a lot of good ideas for that, and the housing affordability strategy does the same thing. There's a lot of good ideas in there, and we just need to figure out where we want to make those tweaks. I think it's so the comp plan piece is sort of setting policies and putting the ideas in motion. If we need to change some plan designations or collapse plan designations, we can set that direction. And some of that will happen during that synthesis phase where we're actually talking about map changes. How the zoning works, all the details in the zoning, some of that's going to be follow-up work. We think that the changes related to ADUs are really relatively easy. low-hanging fruit. We might as well take advantage of it. And the state had money set aside to help cities with their housing issues, and they want to give us money. And what we identified as a couple of tasks is, let's fix the ADU section, and let's look comprehensively at whether or not there are other code sections that are creating real obstacles for housing, and identify those. That's what we're going to ask. We're asking for money for those. And we'll be coming back to you for a resolution, because it takes a intergovernmental agreement to make that happen. The other project that's going on right now is the Cottage Cluster Project. That also includes some code amendment ideas, and that's the first piece of that work. So those will, how those things play out are two concepts that look at a lot of the single-family zones for where we would be adding housing. So that's really where a lot of our supply is. The higher density locations are around some of the different commercial areas near the downtown. And those are the areas that today are pretty well served by transit. So I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for us to be looking at multifamily sites in locations that are off transit routes. So in some ways, we've got a lot of the map is kind of set, and we can kind of look for those missing middle locations out in single family areas and adjoining those multifamily areas.
And I would just, I don't agree with that
Okay.
the map, I don't believe that the map should be set. I think that we've just sort of accepted it as set for so long. And that's why we are where we are, and that's why we have in our comp plan references to specific zones and unit limits and that to me is maybe a little bit too specific, and we should be looking for language that's specifically vague enough to get us to where the community might be willing to go.
Okay.
We've got lots of bus lines and even in our UGMA eventually some really well established bus lines that it's not the Orange Line for sure, but the 71 and the 72 and these other buses that I've ridden many times are really potentially rapid bus systems down the road. And so in my mind I don't accept the map the way it is, and I don't think that we should necessarily use that as our guiding star. I think that there are models out there of communities that have really done an excellent job of talking with their communities in a very public way and asking them, if this is your vision, if you really want housing that is affordable and accessible and from every stage of your life, if you want to age in place, age in the neighborhood where you grew up in, then this is a new way to think about it. And specifically I'm thinking about form-based code, which has absolutely nothing to do with the number of units. It has everything to do with, so-called character of a neighborhood. So allowing for, 7 units in an old Victorian if that's what a homeowner chooses to do because she wants to be able to remain in that house and also and live there for the rest of her life, and also provide affordable options which benefit both the renter and her as the landlord. So I would ask that, I agree with you, Lisa, that this is so important that I think that we should be looking at this almost as a separate block. I think that 2 months is nothing
Really
when we're
short.
talking about the projection of, when we're talking about forming what development looks like for the next 30 years in our city. I think 2 months is nothing.
Well, 2 months coming from where?
Extra.
No, so,
An additional
I mean,
2
the
months
blocks
for
are
adoption.
6 months, but yeah.
There's, if you think that through, there's an election between, just to put it all out on the table so everybody's very clear. The date that they're shooting for has whatever council gets elected this November will still be in place. If we push it out further, the potential for a new council, at least 2 new members, to be in place to approve the last 2 years' work, who may not agree with the last 2 years' work.
If we push it to
Mayor,
to
actually,
spring,
that's not the case.
Yeah.
So you would have an election, it would be a year later. So you'll have an election this November in 2018.
That we were-
Then 2019 would be when we'd be coming back for adoption. And then you'd have
For the
another
entire
election
plan.
the following year.
20.
Yeah, so you actually will be mid-cycle.
Well, then why are we pushing it so hard?
It's not that we're pushing it, it's that we've made commitments, and there are things that,
Well, there are contracts, right? There are consultants.
if Denny will commit that he can make that happen, then I am fine with it.
We're going to do our very best to make it happen in the
Okay.
time frame that we've set out.
Okay.
But some of that was making some assumptions that we weren't blowing everything up. But
I've been talking about blowing things up for months,
That
so.
shouldn't be the thing that guides our timeline.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it.
But
Right.
I think we have to have a good discussion about some of these different tools that are available. And just the form-based code work, generally when it is applied in a developed area, it is very much a hybrid kind of model that's applied. It's not a pure form-based code. Form-based codes tend to work in a greenfield site where there isn't
Cincinnati,
existing
Ohio,
development.
just adopted it, and it's much more urban and dense than Milwaukee.
I'm sorry?
Cincinnati, Ohio is a very recent model, and it's not greenfields. It's urban, existing development.
Yeah.
And I spent 2 years in Park City trying to do form-based code to try and get it through on an industrial part of town. And it got scrapped after 2 years just because there were so many nuances. I'm not saying we shouldn't try it. I'm saying that it is a very complicated way of planning, and there are a lot of nuances in it.
We can certainly approach it and try to figure out a way to make it work. But I'm saying most of the time, when you look around the country, it's used to guide new development on greenfield sites. A lot of people have used it in more of a hybrid-based form. So you're doing a little bit of regular traditional zoning plus using the form-based to modify the shapes and add some flexibility. But there aren't a lot of places that have just totally gone with a pure form base. That doesn't mean we can't explore it. We can definitely explore it.
Denny,
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, to Angel's point about the specificity in our comp plan, do you find that our comp plan is more specific than the average
I'm
comp
sorry?
plan? Well, Angel had talked about how our comp plan has some specifics about zoning and
Oh,
On these
Density.
policies in particular, yeah.
And
they're
so
very
I was
prescriptive.
wondering if our comp plan, Milwaukee's comp plan, is more prescriptive than the average, or do you know if that's true?
no, I don't think so. It's a common plan of that era.
I would agree, having worked in other cities as well, especially comp plans that were developed in the 1980s into the early 1990s. They were all about basically just compliance with statewide planning goal 10 and how you could implement that through the zoning code and, the diversity of housing types and the diversity of populations served. So they were all about kind of compartmentalizing all of these different land use zones, and this is how we're going to serve this segment of the population, this is how we're going to serve this. So it's kind of a relic of that age.
Okay.
And so,
And are they, over time, becoming less specific? I mean, with the modern comp plan?
Yeah, you still need to meet the general objectives of your acknowledged plan in Oregon. And what that means, for the most part, is any changes you make, and especially in the metro area, you cannot reduce the overall density.
Okay.
So
But you could increase it.
you can increase it.
Yeah, and I don't think anything we're
So-
talking about is.
So that's why I think we have all the flexibility in the world that we want for that sort of move. It's if we were going in and saying we wanted to decrease densities, then we'd be bumping up against state land use requirements and metro land use requirements.
So I also made a flippant answer on how much time this would take, and I don't actually know. So it is a question that I would pose to you guys to do this right, because I think that this is a robust conversation, and I think it probably dictates that we engage the public differently. So what I've heard so far is a town hall meeting, probably a couple of council meetings to talk about it, as well as the comp plan committee coming together and having a discussion, though we might want to consider jointly running that meeting as a public meeting with council around this goal. We seem to be doing meetings with the comp plan committee once a month. Is that about
Yeah,
right?
we've had a little bit of a break since the last one, but for the adoption, for the resolution for the first block. But
And for the first block, how many meetings did you guys hold around this?
we had 5 meetings.
So it was 5 months?
Yeah.
4 months,
So
4 months.
we had a break at Christmas into the New Year, but
Okay. So, and I'm great extending it, but I just want to make sure that we're all in agreement that that means that it's probably March.
Well, I think the key thing to do is we had one open house in block 1, and then we had the community survey. This time we were going to do the community survey earlier in the process with the open house. Maybe what we need are sort of 2 open houses. One to sort of explore ideas more generally, and the second one then to really focus in on what we want to accomplish.
So I guess my question to council then, based on that, is I'd like to give staff a chance to come back to you with a proposal for how to separate these out a little more and to give you a more robust conversation around housing. My question is, within that, what are your goals for how we engage you and how we engage the community around that discussion so that when we bring a plan back, it fits those expectations?
Well, and I would take it further, how we engage the comp plan committee. I know throughout the last process, almost everyone was frustrated by how superficial it felt, I guess, or that we didn't really, nobody got to dig in on everything, right? If you got to dig in, you got to dig in on the one category you chose to dig in on, but you were maybe interested in 2 or 3. This one, everyone's going to be interested in housing. So I concur with Angel. I had it in my head that this was a 2-year thing, and so there were actual reasons that could be.
There are
It is
actual
2 years.
reasons.
It is 2 years.
There are actual reasons, and that's why I'd like to have some time, and those aren't things that I can discuss in a public forum. So I need to have that discussion in private.
Okay, but this is the big one. This is the one where we're going to change the most things. And back to the form-based code, that would then open up some of the issues we've had around minimum and maximum lot sizes, right? Which have pushed us into having to clear-cut big lots in order to get the exact number of units with the exact number of sizes of, and that's been problematic, and I don't think it's necessary.
Would you like us to maybe do a work session on form-based code for the council? I mean,
Please.
we could bring in, maybe
That'd
we
be
could bring
great.
somebody in who's.
Or maybe do it
done
jointly.
Yeah.
Do a session with
Okay.
the committee and council
Don't we
simultaneously.
And the
we had
planning
a-
commission.
We
And
had
planning
a
Planning commission.
we had a planner on staff, and I'm really sorry I'm forgetting her name. She actually worked for us, and she did work, I believe in Cincinnati and some of the work was on their form-based code changes, and I'm forgetting her name, but she worked for us for a while.
Lee?
Lee, thank you. Lee, she did some work on that project.
She would have been pretty junior because she was pretty.
I just mean in terms of, looking for, some knowledge of this community and also of a process that happened. I think that could be a potential resource and
Well,
others.
there's a consultant who was based in Portland. I'm not sure if she's still based in Portland. Has done a lot of work in this area nationally, and she's who I would call as someone to come in and talk about it. Marcy McAnally is her name.
What was her name?
Marcy McAnally.
Okay.
And I think she'd know where it's worked and what the issues are in similar kind of built-out situations. So I would.
At the
I would
Smart
call
Cities
her.
conference a couple years ago, Eli Spivak and somebody else, I forget who it was, also gave a really good presentation on form-based code,
Okay.
because it's how they believe we get to the missing middle. I don't know how much longer you guys want to go on this topic, but I'm going to
I'm going to change topics for just one quick second. The neighborhood hub discussion we've been having. Mary's been out to, Mary and David have both been out to a couple at the Llewellyn and Ardenwald, and then David went to Hector Campbell last night. Mary was at the farmer's market on Sunday. And we've got this survey out right now, and we've got, I think, 280 some responses.
Oh, really?
on the
Good.
survey.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Great
so
job.
this has been a really, I think, partly I think it's because of the way we're doing it, kind of going out and reminding folks, and we've got a lot of people on our mailing list now, and it's only maybe a 10-minute survey, so it's not killing people to do it, but I think we've gotten a lot of interesting input. And that structure, what we proposed out there for folks, is a very incremental approach to creating hubs. So it was kind of I think a safe, maybe a little safer. We didn't go in and say we're going to blow this intersection up and see it redevelop right away. It's let's add some food carts in the first 5 years, and let's establish a few, brick and mortar stores in the second 5 years, and let's add some housing in the third 5 years. So it was this grow these things in a slow way, and I think that's been I think folks have been looking at that as a really positive kind of approach.
It is a bit of a natural segue to some of the topics, especially if you're wanting to explore a form-based code. In discussing neighborhood hubs, and especially if people are wanting to incorporate some additional commercial uses that would likely require density, it's talking about how, what's your comfort level with row houses, what's your comfort level with garden apartments, what's your comfort level with some of these other missing middle housing types. And so, we could try to integrate the two and talk about, when it's form-based and there's, a maximum building form, then, some of the concerns potentially about impacts of large apartment buildings, directly adjacent to detached single-family residential might be, some of those concerns might be, lessened. And so, I think the community is already starting to have some of these discussions, but I would agree that, we're definitely going to need to have some pretty robust engagement related to housing. And so my question would be, do we want it to be, if we were to kind of peel off housing, would it be kind of offset and concurrent, where you have a separate open house potentially related to housing, or a separate event related to housing, but it's kind of, offset by 2 or 3 months, you're still working on other topics? Or are you wanting to have, a topic, a period of time where we're just talking about housing, where people aren't distracted about other topics?
I need a little time.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to bring this back at our upcoming meeting. And I think that what I do here definitely is you want a lot of time on this, and you want it to be robust.
Dig in a little deeper.
And we will make sure you get that. So we will fulfill that agreement with you. But I need a little time.
And I do think there's kind of I did think, looking at the boards you had and having participated in some of the neighborhood hubs discussions, I do think that's a little bit of a segue to get people thinking, oh yeah, like having this little hub and then having row houses, yeah, sure, that's okay. Nobody's really saying, everything has to be single family detached. So I do think that creates a little segue, but I do think there's sort of a more public education aspect to all of this about, and you really don't have to go to Cincinnati. You go look at Irvington.
Right.
Irvington is full of little 8-plexes and 4-plexes mixed in with the ginormous houses.
Then they look exactly like the ginormous houses,
houses.
because that's what we used to do.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
I lived in
Right.
those neighborhoods. I lived in those neighborhoods.
Right.
And we do have them right here.
Everything old is new again.
Right.
I don't think you're hearing any disagreement from staff on that. I think it is a question of what type of code we use in order to get to that outcome, if that's what you guys want to do, and how you want to utilize the map in order to get there. And that's a part of what I'd like to talk to Denny and David about, just so that we can come up with some options for you to discuss before we go too far down this path.
And when I mention the pure kind of form-based code requirements. It's you know, the idea behind those is that you don't, you know, you would design for commercial use where you want commercial uses. You're going to require storefront windows where you want commercial uses, and where you don't want commercial, you're going to allow, you know, residential forms to dominate, and so people wouldn't tend to build commercial in those types of uses. So, I mean, the pure version of form-based code doesn't regulate use at all. And when I talk about a hybrid, it's, you know, residential, you still might be designating residential areas, you still might be designating commercial areas, but you're using the form requirements to shape those buildings. So, and Portland right now with their residential infill project is doing a little of that with they're shrinking the size. What they're proposing is shrinking the size of single-family homes, but allowing multiple units in those single-family homes in most of the east side, most of inner Portland. So it is a sense form-based housing or form-based code requirements, because it's guiding how big places can be, but it's allowing multifamily in that same shell. We have some elements of form-based code with our own residential infill standards right now, because we push the bulk to the middle and push the garage back. You know, so there's lots of different ways to look at this.
What is I mean, Portland's put their vote off a couple times now. What is the timeline there?
I think it's next year.
Oh, they've put it off to next year now. Okay.
That's what I recall.
Okay. Okay.
You know?
Yeah, I haven't followed the last couple of months.
Okay.
So we'll come back.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
This helps because it gives us a little better understanding what you're interested in.
Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, upon adjournment to the study session, council will meet in executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute ORS 192.6602H to consult with counsel concerning legal rights and duties regarding current litigation or litigation likely to be filed.
Are we adjourned?
So we are adjourned.